Inside the Soviet camps, the days after the German attack on June 22nd were a time of shock and intense excitement. Most narratives by captives in the camps believed everything had suddenly changed. It would be a dramatic turning point in their lives. Countless conversations took place. Each prisoner had two overriding questions. What did the event mean for himself? How would it affect the course of the war? Prisoners were aware that the enormous camp population must have a significant role in a war between the Soviet Union and Germany. What would that role be? The author of A World Apart, one of the finest narratives about the Soviet camps during this period, wrote that, "During the first few weeks of the war, we talked of the fighting rarely and surreptitiously, but always in the same words, 'They are coming.'" As prisoners tried frantically to learn about the new events, something that seemed incredible happened. Fresh contingents of young and healthy NKVD soldiers arrived at the camp to strengthen the garrison. But at the same time, the names of towns mentioned in wireless communiques made it clear that the front was moving rapidly eastward. The official Soviet answer to the German invasion came quickly: a declaration of war on all potential internal enemies, which meant the prisoners in the camps. The reaction of captives was very different. All German prisoners from the Volga settlements were treated with great respect by the Russian prisoners, who believed that they would soon be masters of the country. More than 1,000 miles to the east, in the gold mining center of Kolyma, a Russian prisoner observed a similar rapid response to the bulletin about the invasion. He wondered what would happen to the prisoners. As if in answer to my thought, a detachment of guards appeared, marching with a quick step up the only street of the settlement. They disappeared into the gate of the camp, and almost immediately I saw two of them hauling something dark into the tower nearest to me. Looking at it hard, I managed to distinguish a machine gun. One Russian writer remembered the announcement of the attack. Jumping from our bunks in the night of June 23rd, after being wakened by the furious firing of anti-aircraft guns, many of us congratulated each other on the outbreak of war we had been expecting so long. Some now shook each other by the hand, hoping for liberation in the near future. These were men like myself who were outraged, ashamed, and helpless, who wanted to save their country, wrest it from the clutches of arbitrary rule, restore liberties, and put an end to the constant mass terror. This was Dmitri Panin, who after the war became a friend of Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and the model for the character Sologdin in Solzhenitsyn's novel The First Circle. Panin was a writer, and in his own book, The Notebooks of Sologdin, he described the initial reaction in his camp to the news of the German attack. He believed the majority of Russians outside the camps were hostile to the regime. If the Germans established a provisional Russian government in Kiev or another Russian city, he was certain they would give it their allegiance. An uprising would follow. Throughout the summer and autumn, the excitement at Panin's camp continued. A railway engine stood waiting, fired, noisily blowing off steam, preparing to evacuate guards and administrators if the camp was overrun. The presence of the steam engine ready to depart created a constant sense of suspense. Observers and writers agreed that the size of the camp population represented a huge vulnerability for the Soviet Union. After the conclusion of the war, Alexander Solzhenitsyn dramatized the moment of the German attack in his play Prisoners. An anti-Soviet Russian soldier named Kolosovitov forcefully claimed that victory over Stalin was a fruit waiting to be plucked. "We should have landed forces outside the labor camps. All one needed to do then was to knock out the miserable camp guards, and hungry hands would be searching out for armaments. We would have had an army 12 million strong, and in the rear, what's more. But Hitler, that arrogant idiot, he was afraid to create independent regimes from us." In Vanished Without Trace, Anthony Eckhart described the same anxiety in a camp in the Urals, and the excited expectation that the prisoners' lives could change at any moment. Imagine a crowd of prisoners, exhausted after work, living on the narrow margin between physical torture and the early prospect of death by exhaustion. They know perfectly well that their miserable situation is due to the Soviet system.